And I spent most of that time actually painting murals in the mess halls of various commanders who thought I was a slick little artist and a terrible telegraph repairman. But along the way, I was learning how to make a chart. A score for a music is a chart. It tells everybody what to do. It tells each instrument what part he does, how much of it he's supposed to do, and when he's supposed to stop. Well, that's what a television script is. It's a document designed to tell the electrical guy what you want, and the sound guy what you want, and the actors what you want, and the special costuming that you want, and any other remarkable things in the thing. It's all one piece of information laid over another piece of information, laid over another piece of information. The year was 1959. Everything was in a turmoil. The Beats, Jack Kerouac, Ginsberg, that crowd had appeared on the scene. Literature was falling apart in many ways. Let us not forget that Rod Serling was a playwright. His instinct, his heart, was in the stage. He understood actors. He knew how to write dialogue. He understood dialectic, the way one person can convince you they're absolutely right, and then the other person mounts an emotional argument to prove you're absolutely wrong. And your mind goes, oh, no, he's right. Wait a minute, no, he's right. And if you can do that for 90 minutes, you're a playwright. And Rod Serling was a playwright caught in a world where technology, in the form of primitive television, was taking hold, and the opportunity to be a playwright for the camera gave him an opportunity to invent television while it was inventing him. I go on. I wanted to be a writer. My best friend was Charles Beaumont. I had met him, fallen in love with him and his mentality, his honor, his dignity, his intelligence, his education, his desires, and his work. I read his stories. I knew this was a guy who could teach me something. And not only that, but I had a tattered screenplay in my hands. And I told him and William F. Nolan and Richard Matheson, and they said, what do you do? And I said, well, I must be a screenwriter because I wrote this script and I sold it to some people. What people? Well, you wouldn't know them. Where did this take place? In a closet somewhere. When will this film be made? I haven't the faintest idea. Are you sure you actually got money for this? Yes. How much? Total peanuts. Well, and they would look at me, but there was that script. And I wanted to break out of being a draftsman, working 9 to 5. I wanted to be part of the media, and most of all, I wanted to pursue my fantastic love for science fiction. At that time, had people said, okay, George, you die, what do you want on your tombstone? I want George Clayton Johnson, a science fiction fan. That will let everybody know I'm not your ordinary bear, because I have never yet to meet a dedicated science fiction fan who wasn't extraordinary. And among that number were people like Forrest J. Ackerman, who had, when I saw what they were building with this thing called sci-fi fandom, I was totally intrigued, and I went to my first science fiction convention in 1958 as the guest of Charles Beaumont, where I got a chance to drink liquor with editors and writers like A.E. Van Vogt and Ray Bradbury and Paul Anderson and others whose names you may or may not know. But there I was in 1958 at Southgate, which was in this case the Alexandria Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, with all of these celebrated folks, saying to myself, that's what I want to be. I was intrigued and fascinated to have people like John W. Campbell, Jr., who was the editor of Astounding Space and Time, sitting down with me for 10 or 15 minutes to talk with me, or to share some liquor. Those were the days. But I had no credentials. I went to Ray Bradbury, and I said, when I say I went to Ray Bradbury, what happened was there was a group that called themselves the Fictioneers. They met once a year on an informal basis at some cafe or restaurant, and they were all penny-a-word guys who wrote for the pulp magazines or who were editors for the pulp magazines. And I met at that gathering Leo Margulies, who had 42 Western pulp magazines under his editorship, everything from range romances to blazing guns. And along the way, everything Western you can think of. And he was an editor. And I met Sam Mines, who was the editor of Startling Stories back in '58. That determined me more and more to want to be a science fiction writer and to learn how to do that. I met Ray Bradbury at that Fictioneers thing. I was at the bar after the discussion, after I'd had a little conversation. Somebody elbowed in next to me and ordered a glass of wine. It was Ray. I had the opportunity to speak to him, so I began to tell him how much I admired a story that he had written for a recent issue of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction called Icarus Montgolfier Wright. Icarus Montgolfier Wright was a story about man's desire to fly like the birds, our envy of that, our myth about Icarus who flew too close to the sun, the story of the Montgolfier brothers who built the lighter-than-air balloons and hot gas and went up above Paris, and the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk who managed to put together a contraption and fly in the air. And I read that story full of mythology and poetry and a love of language. And I was telling Ray this. And I said, as a matter of fact, I know how to illustrate this. I know how to make a film out of this. And he said, no, you're kidding. And I said, no, I'm not kidding. Please give me permission. And he said, God bless you, my son, go and do it. Then he said, let me give you some advice. Don't interrupt your own work or your own schedule, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, when you're about to put the typewriter away, sit down and type out one page. At the end of 30 days, you will have a script. And therefore, God bless you, da-da, and off he went. And I wrote the script, and I gave it to Ray Bradbury, and he liked what I had done and ran it through his typewriter again, and then gave me printed copies of it because he had the money to Xerox it. And I took it out to a guy named Jules Engel, who worked at California Institute of the Arts as a teacher, and he took it to Herb Klin, who owned Format Films, which was a spin-off from UPA that had made Willie the Kid and Gerald McBoing and all of those things. So I found myself surrounded by electric people who liked the script and wanted to make it. We got Joseph Magnani, who was Ray Bradbury's illustrator, to spend 2 years making, first of all, 3,000 sketches and ultimately 300 stills, paintings, and then putting the paintings on a flatbed editing machine and tried to move the camera instead of the artwork, and found that it worked absolutely splendidly, and we made a short film. This was 1958 going on 1959, and everyone around me, Beaumont and the others, were totally impressed that I had made enough of an impact on Ray Bradbury to end up collaborating with Bradbury on something that was turning into a reasonably hot item. And Format put $14,000 into the making of it. And then we heard that Rod Serling was coming to town. He had had a meeting with Ray Bradbury. The two had put their heads together into the wee hours of the morning, had come up with absolutely fabulous plans, and had gone off to prepare for this advent of Rod Serling and his new show. Now, among the people that Ray talked about to Rod and talked to them about Rod was Charles Beaumont, who went with Ray and with Richard Matheson to a place where they were showing The Velvet Alley, Rod Serling's Playhouse 90 teleplay late in his career.